Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone this morning, especially the Minister McKenna. Thank you very much for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you with the committee, and we're looking forward to today. It's one of our first studies, and we're really glad to have it back and finally, hopefully, get it into legislation soon. So, welcome also to Mr. Wilkinson. And Mr. Lucas, thank you for being here with us today. And we'll hand the floor over to you, Ms. McKenna.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be before this committee. You guys do really great work, and I love the fact that you're able to work together, which is great. I'm going to start by recognizing we're on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Je vous remercie de me recevoir aujourd'hui.
Thank you for having me here today to discuss Bill C-57, an act to amend the Federal Sustainable Development Act. First, let me say again that this bill would not have been possible without your help. Your recommendations are the foundation for the amendments in this bill, and I look forward to a lot of interesting discussion as we move forward. Your report clearly showed that there is room for improvement in the current system. The current act has had positive results. For example, it's helped Canadians better understand our progress towards sustainable development by providing a more clear, overarching picture. And it's led to robust public consultation, and that's had an important role in shaping each strategy. For example, our recent 2016 to 2019 Federal Sustainable Development Strategy was created by input ranging from discussions with Indigenous organizations, detailed input by the Royal Society of Canada, a council of many of Canada's leading scientists, and videos from youth. We've made progress, and now we have the opportunity to take that even further, to make sure future governments continue down that path. Working together, that's what I hope we can accomplish through this bill. Today, I'd like to say a few words about my vision for this bill and our renewed approach to federal sustainability, what I hope we can achieve together. Then, I want to talk in more detail about how this bill responds to the issues you brought up in your report and why I think it's the right approach to strengthening the FSDA. Finally, I'd like to address some of the concerns raised during debate at second reading.
To achieve. Looking forward, my vision is an ambitious, aspirational, federal sustainable development strategy that drives coordinated action across government towards common goals and targets. It's a strategy that promotes accountability through measurable targets, clear and balanced reporting, and strong oversight by parliamentarians. And it's an inclusive strategy that reflects the priorities and perspectives of Indigenous peoples, stakeholders, and all Canadians. And that calls for action across Canadian society. I think we can build on the improvements that we've made with the current FSDS. This strategy raised the bar with ambitious goals, strong targets and indicators, a clear commitment to sustainable development principles, and broad participation by federal departments and agencies. Bill C-57 would make these improvements permanent and help go further in future strategies. Ce qui m'amène maintenant à parler en
Let me now go on to speak in depth about a few key aspects of the bill. Your report said very clearly that revisiting the purpose is essential to improving the FSDA. The revised purpose in Bill C-57 differs in some ways from your recommendation, but I believe it reflects many of the same basic elements. First, it shifts the Act's emphasis to advancing sustainable development and improving quality of life not just environmental reporting. Second, it moves from a focus on environmental decision-making to sustainable development decision-making, recognizing that sustainability goes beyond just the environment. Finally, it recognizes that the FSDS needs to respect our domestic and international commitments. That includes the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity.
To guide our actions. This bill would add 7 new, well-accepted principles to the Act. I want to note in particular the addition of intergenerational equity. This has been at the core of sustainable development since the very beginning and speaks to our commitment to build a greener Canada for future generations. You called for the amendments to enable a whole-of-government approach and for the government to review which organizations should be required to prepare sustainability strategies. Based on your recommendation, our bill would expand the requirements of the Act to more than 90 departments and agencies, compared with just 26 today. The objective really is to put sustainable development at the forefront of decision-making everywhere in government, not just in organizations with a strong environmental mandate. We heard you when you called for stronger accountability and enforceability under the FSDA. That's clearly a major focus for us with our strong commitment to results and delivery. The bill responds to that in a few key ways. First, it would require targets to be measurable and include a time frame. This would provide the flexibility to address a broad range of issues in the FSDS, including emerging issues, while also ensuring that we clearly define what we want to achieve, that we can measure our progress, and that we can be held accountable for results. Bill C-57 would also introduce a requirement for departments and agencies to report each year on their sustainable development progress. This complements the current requirement for an FSDS progress report every 3 years. It will ensure that any remaining challenges can be identified and addressed early so that we can meet our targets. Finally, I'd like to address some of the concerns brought up during second reading debate. I'll start with the 2030 agenda and how it should be reflected in the FSDA and in our strategy. Our government completely supports the 2030 agenda and its 17 sustainable development goals. The current FSDS reflects those goals. What I want to avoid is limiting the Act and what will be addressed in the FSDS. We know that sustainable development is an evolving landscape. This bill clarifies within the Act's purpose that the FSDS must respect and support the commitments that we have now. That includes the 2030 Agenda, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and others. But it also leaves room to incorporate future commitments and issues as they arise. I recall the testimony by the Honourable John Godfrey, sponsor of the original private members bill that led to the FSDA, highlighted the risk of being too prescriptive with respect to FSDS content. Speaking before this committee during a review of the Act, he noted that the original draft bill didn't really talk about climate change. Today, clearly, climate change is a key area of focus throughout our strategy. I also want to note that implementing the SDGs through legislation is not a common practice around the world. In fact, sustainable development legislation is uncommon. Canada is actually one of only 5 countries with sustainable development legislation, and no country that I'm aware of has actually has a legal requirement for a sustainability strategy based on the 2030 Agenda. So we are not an outlier in that respect. Next, I'd like to talk about a whole-of-government approach. For us, a whole-of-government approach means we're all involved. Sustainability is important for all of us. What is important is that we're all working together to take action to contribute to advancing sustainability. This bill includes amendments designed to support a whole-of-government approach, such as including more departments and agencies, and specifying that all of them, including central agencies, must be engaged in developing and reporting on the FSDS. I also want to mention the role of parliamentarians in implementing the FSDA. This is extremely important and something to which we gave a lot of thought. Our intention is for one committee to really take ownership of the Act and the FSDS. And clearly, this committee has the experience and knowledge to help guide the implementation. I heard concerns about reforms to the Sustainable Development Advisory Council, specifically about allowing remuneration of members and reimbursement of expenses. The current Act prohibits this as it was originally a private member's bill. That means we are limited in the role that a council can play. For example, with members located all around the country, it's unlikely I would ever have the opportunity to meet with them in person. Changing that provision would facilitate my ability to engage with the committee in an effective manner. I also want to note that while this wasn't specifically recommended in your report, I said in my initial response last October that I would propose additional changes to improve the Act's effectiveness and ensure that it reflects Canadian values. This is one example. The goal is to ensure that Indigenous peoples and stakeholders can play a strong role in our sustainability approach. Je conclurai en disant
I'll close by saying that this is a great opportunity to strengthen an important piece of legislation. As a government, we are committed to a renewed approach to federal sustainability. We have a strong FSDS in place that supports our international commitments, including the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. We are continuing the conversation with Canadians about sustainable development, and we are already beginning to report on our results. This bill will solidify improvements we've made through the FSDS and build on our strengths, moving us toward the vision of an ambitious, accountable, inclusive strategy focused on results. I welcome your views, comments, and questions. Thank you.
We'll now move into questions, and we have Mr. Bossio up first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Minister, for being here today. As the Chair had mentioned, this is an exciting moment to have one of our reports finally be reflected in an Act. But in that reflection, we recommended in our report that the FSDA needs a whole-of-government approach and the comprehensive engagement of all central government agencies to develop and implement the strategy. We also recommended additional measures for improving enforceability and accountability of the strategy, which is one of my concerns. How does the bill ensure that departments are following the legislative requirements laid out in the Act?
Thank you very much. So I absolutely agree that we need a whole-of-government approach. I've seen this through my portfolio. When you talk about tackling climate change, you can't do it through just the Minister, through Environment and Climate Change Canada. I think what is really important is that we have taken that whole-of-government approach. The bill extends coverage from more than 26 departments to over 90 departments and agencies. It would ensure that that these departments and agencies are bound by the Act to contribute to the development of the FSDA and its progress reports. And critically importantly, it formalizes the role of the Treasury Board. So it enables that there's consistent application across government efforts to green government operations. I've seen that this can be extraordinarily effective, having Treasury Board as they review submissions, that they ensure that there is a whole-of-government approach. And the bill would allow for further expansion to the Act's coverage over time. For example, through the addition of Crown corporations, you also saw that there were submissions from the 26 departments and agencies. They all complied in providing their reports as to how they were complying with the FSDA. So I feel confident that this will result in a whole-of-government approach and will result in concrete actions.
Okay, thank you, Minister. We also recommended in our report the creation of a Future Generations Advocate. While the Environment Commissioner does a great job in her role of keeping government accountable on a number of environmental issues, her role is a backwards-looking audit role. The main function of her role is not looking forward to the future generations. How do we ensure that without a forward-looking Future Generations Advocate, that we ensure enforcement, oversight, and accountability of the FSDA is being carried forward by all government?
Well, I certainly agree that when you talk about the importance of future generations, that's critical to this Act. That's one of the principles that's embodied, that we need to be thinking about how are the actions that our government is taking across government impacting on future generations. And we believe that is clear with the principle being embodied in the Act. We also do believe that the Commissioner has a critical role, that the Commissioner does a very good job in looking at sustainable development monitoring, and her mandate includes the respect for nature and the needs of future generations. And we believe that that is an effective model, both the Act, but also with the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development.
Good, Chair. I'd like to pass the rest of my time over to Mr. Amos.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bosio, I appreciate that. Minister, Parliamentary Secretary, thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing this legislation forward. It is really exciting to have parliamentarians working together. I think this is a great step forward. This is an act that does need to demonstrate to Canadians that we can take leadership in shifting the way our federal government is accountable for its own behaviour, and hopefully we can have the federal government lead the rest of the country as well. I think there are some avenues Mr. Bosio has pointed to already that could enable strengthening. One aspect that I'd like to see beefed up is in the principles that are applied. There are a number of principles that were recommended in the original report that weren't reflected here, and I think that I'd like to hear whether you're open to other principles. There's some that stick out to me. The principle of prevention, non-regression, in light of what happened with the previous administration. The principle of environmental justice, the principle of a right to a healthy environment. Those are some of the principles that were pointed to in the original report. I wonder if you could speak to your openness to considering others.
So thank you very much. I mean, I think that it is important that we have a proper frame which sets out the principles. So in addition to the basic principle and precautionary principle that were already in the FSDA, the bill proposes to add principles of intergenerational equity, polluter pays, internalization of costs, openness and transparency, involvement of Aboriginal peoples, collaboration and results, and delivery. These were principles that were selected based on issues that were raised in the committee's report and those that are fundamental to sustainability and development. We are willing to examine and explore inclusion of additional principles. I mean, I think it's very important that we not do what John Godfrey warned against, which is to be too prescriptive in terms of principles. We know that sustainable development, the concept evolves over time. As he pointed out, climate change was not something that people were really thinking about. The SDGs did not exist at that time, so I think it's just important that we have broad enough principles that they can incorporate future principles, the future ideas and concepts that come up.
Here.
Do you want to take a question?
7 seconds is what you got, so, okay.
I'll pass.
Right.
Thank you, Minister.
Okay, over to Mr. Fast.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks for being in a committee to discuss this bill. Just to get you on the record on one thing, the Sustainable Development Advisory Council is being expanded in its size under this Act. And as you know, during debate in the House, we made the point that we would be supporting this piece of legislation subject to one small amendment, that is to eliminate the remuneration aspect of the Sustainable Development Advisory Council. Can you tell us right here and now that you will be supporting that amendment?
So let's just, I'll just sort of explain the background behind remunerating council members. Right now, there is no remuneration for council members. As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, this was a private members bill, so there wasn't the ability to include that, which as a result means that I can't meet with folks. Because their reasonable expenses can't be reimbursed. We have members located in every province and territory from coast to coast to coast. We have youth members. We have folks that just can't, on their own dime come and meet with me. So I think the key is to ensure effectiveness. I understand that you would consider including reasonable expenses.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a very helpful approach. I think that that the focus is really how do we ensure that we are very mindful of taxpayer dollars, which I certainly agree with, while ensuring that we have effectiveness of this committee. So I think that that is something that we can find common ground on.
Thank you. That's very helpful. The Act, as you have stated, is a whole-of-government approach to addressing the economic, social, and especially the environmental challenges facing government and government decision makers. So you've talked about the whole-of-government approach. You're familiar with the Cabinet Directive. And the Cabinet Directive, supported by guidelines, requires federal departments and agencies to consider environmental concerns early in the planning of policy, plan, and program proposals before making irreversible decisions. And the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development, as you know, recently issued her report. It's actually a number of reports, and in the fourth report, what she says about the whole of government approach and the application of the directive, and I quote her, "Overall, we found that the departments and agencies we examined did not apply the Cabinet Directive to almost 80% of their proposals. Only the Public Health Agency of Canada prepared preliminary assessments and did a reasonable job of that." So we are expanding the number of agencies and departments that are going to be covered by the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. And yet, even with the smaller number, 26 in number of departments and agencies that are covered right now, your department is not getting it done. This is certainly a failing grade from the Commissioner. I mean, 80% of the proposals did not apply the Cabinet Directive. That's 20%. In any exam where you get 20%, that's failing grade. So I'm wondering, how do you expect that with the expansion of the number of agencies and departments that are covered, that your department will be able to enforce what the Act and the Directive require?
So let me just make an important distinction. So there's the Federal Sustainable Development Act, which is what we're talking about right now, and then there's the Cabinet Directive on the environmental assessment of policy plan and program proposals. That's where each minister is responsible for implementing the Cabinet Directive. They are very different things. Clearly, the Cabinet Directive is very important and that we need to do better, and I certainly acknowledge that. But in terms of the FSDA, that act it's prescriptive, as you know. Each department that's subject to it must comply. They must report. They will be tracked. We've now included it's more robust because they must say how they're complying every single year. And then every 3 years, there's an opportunity to review overall how, whether we're advancing on the framework. So I think that distinction is very important. I think that the Federal Sustainable Development Act is now more robust will be more robust with the proposed changes. And parliamentary oversight will ensure that you will see if there are problems. If you do not believe that with the new targets, which are now measurable and time-bound, you'll be able to directly, parliamentarians will be able to directly see whether there is compliance with the FSDA.
Well, Minister, I refer you back to report, the fourth report, and on page 1 under subsection 4.4 talks about the Cabinet Directive and says specifically the Cabinet Directive and its related guidelines require departments and agencies to consider a proposal's effects on the goals and targets of the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. So these two are really, they are completely intermixed. They clearly impose on the minister a responsibility to ensure that our departments and agencies of government implement Canada's Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. And as your responsibilities expand now under the changes that will be made under this legislation, I do want to know from you, how do you plan to ensure that our agencies and departments implement the federal directive and our Federal Sustainable Development Strategy when in fact it appears, certainly from the Commissioner's report, that hasn't been done?
So we are out of your time, unfortunately. It's a great question, and I hope that we can pick up on that question with the next questioner on your side. All right, but we ran out of time there. Sorry about that. Ms. Duncan.
Thank you. I'll certainly pick up on that. Great to have the minister here, and always great to see Mr. Wilkinson. He loves when I say that. Great guy. And great to see the deputy. I think this might be the first meeting I've been at with the deputy. I share the concern raised by Mr. Fast, and frankly, I'm troubled. I'm curious why the minister has ignored the advice of the committee, the recommendation of the commissioner, and the advice of other nations who have gone through the same exercise. We can add on a long list of people who have to do reports, but given that the Commissioner has said we have an abject failure since the initiation of this legislation, and frankly since 1990 with the Cabinet Directive, we have abject failure in doing these analyses. And it's not just this statute, it's the Cabinet Directive. I'm wondering why the Minister has ignored that advice, which was very clear, that there should be a central agency such as Treasury Board or the PCO or the Prime Minister's office directly that should provide the oversight to send a clear message and to provide for greater enforcement of these directives.
Thank you very much for the question. I think there are two parts. So just to reiterate, there absolutely is a Cabinet Directive on environmental assessment of policy plan and program proposals. That is across the board directive that the departments must follow. It's not directly related to implementation of the FSDA. It is important in terms of how departments are going to respond to the requirements under the tool. But when it comes to the FSDA, as I noted, I mean, the effectiveness of the FSDA is set out in the Act. That we have departments that are required to report. They're required to, it's more robust reporting now, it's more robust targets. I'm very pleased that the committee came and said, okay, you have to have measurable targets, because I think it was very weak before. I think that it was very vague, very weak, not time-bound. And so I think the fact that you now have a requirement, so it would be in legislation that requires each department that is subject to the Act, which is now expanding to 90, would be required to comply, I think is very robust. I think there are a variety of different ways that departments will be held accountable. They'll be held accountable publicly, because they will have to report, that it will be transparent. And they will also be held account by parliamentarians, by this committee, who will be reviewing it. Our department will be directly involved, and also Treasury Board will be involved. I'm worried more about effectiveness as opposed to, you know, who is ultimately looking at this. I mean, it's about making sure departments actually deliver on their results, and then ultimately the Commissioner will be looking at these reports. We already have, as I say, every department that was required to comply provided their reports, and there's an opportunity to review them, including by the Commissioner for the Environment and Sustainable Development.
With all due respect, I'm not convinced. I've seen these reports, various portfolios I've sat in. They file a report, gathers dust. When they go to their minister, when they go to Cabinet with a proposal for a policy, for a program, for an initiative, for spending, they do not consider that report. So I'm not convinced. I think it needs to go to a higher central level, and particularly since the 17 goals go way beyond environment. Another thing in the bill that completely puzzles me, Madam Minister, you've said that this act has been updated to reflect the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and yet Section 8 gives the Treasury Board only the power to look at environmental impact, not the full 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So we don't really seem to be moving forward.
Question. So the Sustainable Development Goals is something very close to my heart. I worked in international development. Let's be clear what the Sustainable Development Goals are. It's not just about what government is doing to address the Sustainable Development Goals. It's what a country is doing. So the Federal Sustainable Development Act was created before the Sustainable Development Goals were in existence. And it's, you know, we've tried to broaden the scope, but of course we want to make sure as a country, whether it's the federal government, it's municipal governments, it's Indigenous governments, it's Canadians, that we're actually moving forward to address the Sustainable Development Goals. That's broader than the Federal Sustainable Development Act. I know our government is looking at who is best placed to help lead that, but this mechanism will play into how we comply with the Federal Sustainable Development Goals. But clearly, it's not just government action that determines whether people have clean, like federal government action that determines whether we have clean drinking water. It goes far beyond that. But as you see, we've taken the relevant goals as recommended by the Commissioner on Environment and Sustainable Development, and are tackling them directly through the purview of the Act.
I'm left completely puzzled. I don't believe that you've spoken to the new section 10.1, which limits the Treasury Board powers to environment assessment, not to the full Sustainable Development Goals, so I'm left puzzled. I would like to reiterate what Mr. Amos has said. Canada's already committed under the North American Agreement on Environmental Cooperation to deliver on environmental justice principles, and they're clearly laid out in that side agreement to NAFTA. So I would deeply encourage you to include the environmental justice principles in that list, because it would be consistent to what Canada has already committed to. I'm wondering why. Oh, over. Next round. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you. Mr. Aldag, please.
Good morning. As I know you're aware, the committee here is also working on a heritage study. And one of the witnesses we had was a Christophe Rivet from Mikamos, Canada. And I'm going to go through just a couple of things that he shared with us I think makes a nice connection from that study to the Sustainable Development Act and the Sustainable Development Strategies. He notes that cultural heritage is included in international agreements related to the environment and sustainable development adopted by Canada. He notes that Article 5 of the World Heritage Convention guides our assessment of Canada's compliance with it and offers us an opportunity to update our national tools. And he goes on to to indicate that could include legislation to protect, tools to guide decision-making, and financial incentives to implement proper practices. He indicates another consideration is that international commitments made by Canada regarding sustainable development recognize the role of cultural heritage in achieving sustainability, including under the 17 goals, making cities and human settlements inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. Lastly, he goes into to indicate that the federal Sustainable Development Strategy that aims to guide each department on how to achieve sustainability is an important consideration, and that there's no mechanism to report how we achieve sustainable development while considering cultural heritage, but there's an opportunity there to put that marker down. And so my question is simple. Would you consider an amendment in some form, either in principle or another statement, to bring in cultural heritage to the Sustainable Development Act?
So thank you very much, and thank you for all your advocacy and all your work throughout your career on protecting cultural heritage. It's clearly critical, and we need to take into account cultural heritage when we talk about ecosystem protection, also climate change that has impacts on our cultural heritage. And the revised purpose is broad enough for inclusion of the issue of cultural heritage, given that it specifies that the FSDS must respect Canada's international sustainable development obligations. So I do think it's broad enough. And by implementing the Act through the creation of the FSDS, we can put commitments such as the preservation of cultural heritage into action.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. And now I'm going to kick the rest of my time over to Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here, and you and your team. And I would just want to say, I was very encouraged by your response to our report, our unanimous report that we worked really hard on and worked, as a really good, strong team. So thank you for your response to those recommendations. Our committee did find that enforcement of the FSDS was kind of lacking. And I've noticed that the proposed amendments through this act would remove the mandatory requirement to ensure that performance-based contracts include provisions for meeting the applicable targets referred to in the FSDS. So, our committee recommended clearing this section up and basing it on all targets in the FSDS which are relevant to a specific department. So can you speak to why that section was removed, or whether the Act will still have the accountability measures to ensure sustainable procurement?
So thank you very much for the question. Section 12 of the Act requires that performance-based contracts with the Government of Canada shall include provisions for meeting the applicable targets referred to in the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy and the Departmental Sustainable Development Strategies. So this is something that relates specifically, as you know, to procurement rather than accountability of officials. Procurement is really the purview of Treasury Board, and they do have a strong procurement policy.
Okay, now, I know I have a little bit of time left, and you sort of touched on this earlier, but why does Bill C-57 not require the government to develop a strategy that meets the specific goals that we referenced earlier?
Well, I mean, I think that when we talk about the purpose of the act, it's been broadened, and I think that that's really critical. That whether you talk about future generations, whether you talk about intergenerational equity or the precautionary principle, I mean, I think it's these broad principles. I think that once again, when you look at the private member who brought in the act, John Godfrey, he talked about just being careful about not being too prescriptive. That once you get too prescriptive, you're not going to be able to imagine. As I say, no one could have imagined Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Agreement. Clearly, sustainability is an evolving concept as we see what challenges we have, and we make progress towards taking action on them. So I think that that we have the broad focus and the principles that allows us to be flexible and take action on a wide variety of issues related to sustainability.
How do you feel that we can ensure that future governments are going to hold accountable to the things that we're talking about today if they're not legislated to do so?
Well, I mean, I think that we've really, and once again, thank you to the committee. The committee has really pointed out that we needed to beef up the act, that it needed to be stronger. It needed to ensure that departments didn't just say, yeah, we're doing good things, that it actually required them to have clear targets, measurable targets, and that you had action, that you were had measurable timelines. Because I think if you can't have a way of holding departments account for what they said they do, you're going to have a real problem. So I think that this is a good shift. And I think that the reporting requirements now, whether it's being held account through transparency, so that it'll all be made public, through the committee, through the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development, I think there are a number of very strong measures that will ensure that government departments must comply, and they must do what they've said they're going to do, and continue to be very ambitious as they go forward.
Thank you, Minister.
All right, Mr. Sobuk.
Thank you very, very much. I should want to make, as a proud Manitoban, I would like to make the point that Manitoba's had a Sustainable Development Act since 1998, and I hope you were able to utilize that knowledge, that traditional knowledge from Manitoba, to help write this current act. And I should also note that the City of Winnipeg is the home to the International Institute for Sustainable Development that was negotiated by Conservative Premier Gary Filmon and Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. And I was on the founding board of that. So Manitoba has a very long history of sustainable development. I urge you to avail yourselves of the knowledge from Manitoba. And I'm sure you will, given the new document that Premier Pallister has just put out. One thing about, in your remarks, Minister, paragraph 5, you talked about who you consulted with. I was quite shocked to see that rural communities were not listed there, rural natural resource communities, because rural and natural resource communities are at the forefront of sustainable development and are often the victims of bad environmental policy and also the beneficiaries of good environmental policy. Why were rural communities omitted in the consultation?
Well, thank you very much, and I certainly agree that Manitoba has been instrumental when it comes to sustainable development. I've spent much time working with IISD. I think it does really great work. I was pleased to see the Manitoba Premier recognizing that pollution, there's a cost associated with pollution, and bringing in a price on pollution. Look, there was a wide consultation. We reached out. Canadians had many submissions, including from natural resource companies. And we were really pleased to see the feedback that it is important that we hear from all Canadians, that we hear all perspectives, that we all are part of the solution. We heard from Indigenous communities, we heard from businesses, we heard from environmentalists, we heard from Canadians. They care greatly about this, and I agree that everyone needs to be part of it. We reached out and asked for submissions. We were very active on social media. We reached out through a whole variety of different channels. So certainly, always interested in hearing from all Canadians, including rural Canadians.
Yeah, but even though the list you just gave about verbally about who you consulted with, again, rural and farm and resource communities were again omitted. And it's been a great frustration of mine, having been on both the Environment and Fisheries Committees for almost 7 years now, and departments consistently refuse to acknowledge almost that rural communities even exist and are part of this conversation. Would you agree, Minister, that when I look at the principles of sustainable development and compare them to the Manitoba principles of sustainable development, in the Federal Act as it's written, There's nothing in there that says this act facilitates economic development and the well-being of humans, people, with their economic well-being. Why was that omitted?
In terms of the concept of sustainable development, we certainly believe that it includes economic development. I think it includes social, environmental, health, and economic development. That's kind of understood in the term, and I agree with you. I've always said this, that the environment and the economy go together, that you can't separate them, that unless we have to move towards a cleaner future, and we need to drive the investment needed to do that. So I certainly really, I really support that. And I've just, and thank you to my officials, they've just confirmed that we did do specific outreach to rural communities. I certainly would never exclude any community, and I think farmers are doing amazing things, including in Manitoba. I've met with farmers and agriculture associations talking about net zero tilling, about climate resilient crops that they're using, about the amazing research that they're doing. And so I am someone who believes that we're all in this together, and that we need to be working together, and we need to ensure that not only are we looking at the environment and principles in relation to how we move to a cleaner future, but we're also ensuring that also contributes to growing the economy and jobs and greater wealth, including for farmers.
If I could, Minister, I only have 7 minutes.
And a half left.
I want to make the point that as somebody who's worked in industry, in the forest industry, managing a wastewater treatment plant for a company, and also doing environmental assessment in the oil sands, I'm always irked by this idea that we are, quote unquote, moving to a clean economy as if we're in a dirty economy now. That is absolute nonsense. Everything that is built today in industry, the natural resource industry, forestry, mining, pipelines, is clean and is done to the highest standards in the world. And I recommend that you follow the work of the Modern Miracle Network, spearheaded by Michael Binion, who is completely frustrated by the slagging that the natural resource industry gets from this government. I met with a group of people from a union, the laborers union, after your government basically shut down 3 pipelines, and these people were devastated. These are little people who wanted to work on pipelines, make a good living, and again, these people now are lost. I met with a welding organization. There were a bunch of welders who were looking forward to the Energy East project as a way to buttress their retirement as they move along in life, and because of a process gone wild, that project was canceled, and the hopes and dreams of these people are lost. I would urge this government to care about people first.
I certainly care about people first, and I think that people want to ensure that we have a sustainable planet. And I've worked with many industry organizations, including in the energy sector, who understand that we're moving to a cleaner future. 195 countries signed on to the Paris Agreement, as have businesses, as has everyone, that we need to move to a cleaner future. We need to lower our emissions, and I've been very pleased to see innovations. And let's be clear, we did approve pipelines. Energy East did not go ahead. That was a market decision.
It was not.
We're out of time. Thank you very much. The next up is Mr. Garrettson.
Just very quickly, and then I'll turn it to Mr. Amos. Just following, kind of squaring off a little bit of the conversation with Mr. Silpuck. Minister, did you purposely omit, in his words, rural Canada from the consultation?
So no. So we actually directly engaged with rural Canada. Also, it was a very open process. So I hope the members all reached out to their own communities to encourage them to provide input. That is extremely helpful. The committee it has a broad base of contacts. So certainly it's certainly encouraged that all members, if they have rural members that they feel that they want to have greater engagement with, that they should take it on themselves.
Thank you. My other question is in regards to his comment regarding energy. Would you say that there's always the possibility and the opportunities to improve upon our extraction of resources when it comes to the environmental impact that they have on the world? Is that not the entire purpose of making sure that we're always improving upon the extraction of resources and what we do, and that we're always pushing ourselves to new standards to better and protect the environment?
So I want to thank the member for that point, because it's actually a conservative principle that you want to be more efficient in how you extract resources. Efficiency includes efficiency in terms of the environmental performance, because that's just smart. And that's what I hear when I meet with energy companies. They're always looking at how they improve, how they do things better, how they do things in a cleaner and more efficient way. And that relates to a price on pollution, which is also a conservative principle, that you want to put a price on pollution, most efficient way to reduce emissions, to move to a cleaner future. And that's what everyone wants. I certainly hear that when I'm in the energy sector. I hear that, from farmers. I hear that from everyone. Everyone understands that our goal is to be more efficient. Our goal is to ensure that we reduce emissions. Our goal is to increase innovation, which is certainly what we are seeing as we move to a cleaner future. And ultimately, our goal is to ensure that we have a sustainable planet for our kids and grandkids.
Mr. Ramos?
Thank you. Minister, I'd like to get to the theme of objectives. The committee recommended in its report that broad objectives be established for sustainable development. One of the reasons was because we looked at the draft sustainable development strategy, and we were surprised, to say the least, that the strategy had these long-term aspirational goals, which included, and I'll quote, fresh water and oceans, and taking action on climate change. So there was an empty shell in terms of what there was, what we had in terms of long-term objectives. But I don't find that the legislation or the bill as proposed goes far enough and provides objectives in terms of transitioning to a low-carbon economy, positioning Canada as a leader in clean tech, becoming more, setting out objectives around the ability for all Canadians to have clean air, clean water. So I wonder if you could explore that theme a bit, and if you'd be willing to consider broad objectives as a component of this legislative initiative.
Well, thank you. And I think that, we did the principles that were, the proposed principles for inclusion in the bill are very broad. I think that they certainly do not exclude any of the areas that you were talking about. But once again, I think it's always hard to be, very specific about particular principles, because it could be an extremely long list, but it also could be a list that becomes non-inclusive to new principles. And so I think it's always just a balance in between making broad principles that can include new areas, that include areas that you're already working on, and being too prescriptive so that you would exclude particular areas. I'm going to ask, since my deputy is here, and we're so lucky to have him, I'm going to ask him to say a few words.
I think building on what Minister McKenna noted, against that framework of the goals that the minister noted, within the 3-year individual departmental SD strategies, there is an opportunity then to speak to specific actions on how those goals and commitments the country has made, including international environmental obligations, are being advanced through concrete actions. And then with the annual reporting, Parliament will have an opportunity, and this committee specifically, to review that progress.
I have a minute? Okay, great. I wonder if this is important, not just because it's about getting the federal house in order, but it's also about demonstrating to other provinces how a larger government is able to drive sustainability outcomes. Because this is effectively the biggest corporate entity in the country. What discussions have you had with other provinces around, as part of our overall climate objectives, changing the way governments themselves behave in how they make purchases, et cetera?
Well, thank you very much. It is. I'm meeting with provinces and territories tonight, and so we will be continuing that conversation. I think that's an excellent point. We all need to be looking at how we procure in particular, because that can be a huge driver of economic opportunity, but also of clean growth.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Welcome, Mr. Zimmer, to the table, and you're up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. You mentioned in your speech, you talk about, has been referred to by my colleagues on this side, about sustainability. And it says, your speech said, recognizing that sustainability goes beyond just the environment. And yet, we heard just recently, actually yesterday, from the Premier of Northwest Territories, has a problem with the Liberal version of sustainability. And this is a Liberal MLA, I think have similar ideals to your government. And yet, I'll quote him, Northerners, through their democratically elected government, need to have the power to determine their own fates, and the practice of decisions being made by bureaucrats and governments in Ottawa must come to an end. Decisions about the North should be made in the North. The unilateral decision by the federal government, that's you, made without consultation to impose a moratorium on Arctic offshore oil and gas development is but one example of our economic self-determination being thwarted by Ottawa. Please comment.
So I certainly agree we need to be working with the provinces and territories, that we can't move to a cleaner future on our own. There's only so much federal government can do, and also that provinces are the ones that often have the tools at their disposal to move to a cleaner future. I'm meeting with the provinces and territories, as I said, actually today. It's the Canadian Council for Ministers of the Environment, where we will be talking about issues like how we move to a cleaner future, how do we implement the Made in Canada plan on climate change.
With respect, Minister, though, you've already had the moratorium come into place, and now you're going to go talk to territories and governments. Wouldn't that have been proactive to do that before?
So we've had many conversations with provinces and territories in the whole negotiation of the Made in Canada climate plan. Myself, my deputy, my chief of staff, my entire team was back and forth with each province, traveling to provinces, doing consultations in provinces,
but
working
Minister,
with provinces.
You and I both know that a conversation is listening and talking at the same time. Somebody's talking, somebody should listen and actually listen to what the person has to say on the other side and actually act on what they're proposing. To unilaterally have a moratorium across the North, and it's obviously apparent that this is going to dramatically affect First Nations communities in a negative way that are already being hit economically. Now you just hit them again with any kind of planet sustainable development. So you talk, and we've heard you talk and talk and talk, but the reality on the ground is people are going to go without jobs. And the Premier even just said yesterday, he said the best social program is a job. And you've just taken away jobs from the North. Can you please respond?
So I was very pleased that we had the Premier of the Northwest Territories standing up with the Prime Minister, with provinces and territories to sign on our climate plan. They agreed to our climate plan. We had worked together, and we're going to continue to work together as we implement it.
So a moratorium across the North shuts down 40% of their economy is just shut down. You just shut down almost half of their economy in the North. I guess I'll just bring it back to something, I guess, that always troubles me is that usually leadership involves you doing something yourself that you believe in. And I bet you fly more than I do, and I fly a lot. And I think a lot of Canadians are wondering, how can you talk a big game? We've seen Hollywood stars talk about this too. They talk a big game for everybody else, but do different themselves. Can you respond?
Yes, unfortunately, I have to travel to meetings that sometimes it requires me to be there in person, including in the Northwest Territories. When I work with Indigenous peoples, I need to meet with them directly. That is critically important so that you can understand them. There's some things that you simply can't do by conference call. I try to do conference call. I buy carbon offsets. But there are times where, for example, in Paris, when we were negotiating the Paris Agreement, you can't do that by conference call. In terms of working with Indigenous peoples...
Excuse me, Minister. Certainly efficiencies could be found with your ministry when you fly. I think what we're all looking for, I think what's a more practical position for everybody to be at is sustainable development in terms of responsible resource development. We know we're going to need to use it. Your government has said you're supporting pipelines, and we've heard that. We've not seen pipelines move forward. We have a Kinder Morgan project currently right now before it's supposed to be being built as we speak. And I expect to see the leadership. When I saw you make the announcement that it's approved, I expect the leadership to see that it's actually built. Because it's one thing we've heard a lot of talk about, that you're pro-sustainable resource development. Prove it.
So let's just be clear the difference between the role of government and the role of proponents. So government approves projects or doesn't. It does a proper review, and then it's it's up to proponents. But we've been clear: the environment and the economy go together. We're in a transition to a low carbon future. We've approved pipelines. We're also moving forward to ensure that we have the investment to move to a lower future,
Can I
low
just
carbon
ask
future.
one more question before we're done? The Northern Gateway Pipeline was actually approved by the NEB with a certain amount of conditions. Why would a government disallow a project that had been approved by the NEB with conditions?
Point of order. Madam Chair, that is way outside the scope of why the minister has been invited.
Talking about sustainable development.
No,
and
we're
I'm just
talking,
asking.
we're talking about a specific act. She's here today to speak to a specific act. And now you're bringing up issues that are completely unrelated.
So-
That's my point of order, Madam
So
Chair.
I hear your point of order. So hold on a minute. So I make a ruling on a point of order, and you are straying a little beyond where we were with this committee. We're supposed to be looking at the act, and you were talking about sustainable development, but you were really drilling down on a specific. So you have like 30 seconds or less to bring it round to something more generic rather than a specific project. Thank you.
Prove that the decision to cut Northern Gateway is sustainable, as you mentioned in your speech.
So I'm happy to talk about sustainability. It includes the economy, it includes health, it includes the environment, and that's the frame that we approach, how we move forward. And that is, certainly reflected in the Federal Sustainable Development Act, and that's the approach that we take as a government.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
Point of order,
that.
Madam Chair.
Sorry.
I'm outraged that our colleague across the way challenged my colleague here. I've been on committees for almost 7 years now, and the four of us on this side are veterans of committees, and nobody on the other side has been on a committee. I want to make the point that parliamentary privilege is real and it's important. We are elected by our constituents, and my colleague here, the Northern Gateway Pipeline was in his constituency. It's clearly directly related to the concept of sustainable development. And Madam Chair, you have to give all of us very wide latitude to exercise our parliamentary privilege.
So, Mr. Sopak, I give you the chance to speak. I gave him his full time. I gave him more time because there was the challenge. I ruled on the challenge. I think it was appropriate, and we'll leave it at that, please. And let's move on with the opportunity we have in front of us, please.
May I respond?
Really? No, I've ruled. Let's just move on because we do have time here, and I don't want to waste the minister's time.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Okay. We have, where did it go? We are at time, but I think we are done. We're at 9:45 now, so I think we're just at the end of the time. I was going to give an opportunity for one more question, but really, honestly, we're running almost out of time. So we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much. We'll take a pause. What do I call it? Suspension? Thank you.
Remain seated so she could take pictures.
Yes, okay, so would you mind? We'd like to take a picture. We don't often get the minister in front of us here.
If you want,
So
remain seated. And if
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Garrettson.
I just wanted to follow up on the conversation that we were having before we entertain our next witnesses. And I appreciate the fact that Mr. Sopak indicated that there are 4 veterans on the other side of the table, and I have a great amount of respect for them. However, this isn't my first time sitting around a table or chairing a meeting or being involved in a meeting. And I just want to point out for the record that as Mr. Sopak indicated about parliamentary privilege, one of the most basic parliamentary and fundamental parliamentary privileges is the right for a member of a committee to address a point of order when he or she in their opinion, is of the impression that that the meeting is not following the procedural order that it should. So I just want to say that that is exactly what I did. I raised a point of order.
Okay.
I addressed a specific deficiency in terms of the way that the meeting was being run as I saw it. And then it's up to the chair to use his or her discretion to rule on that, which is exactly what happened. Thank you.
So, Mr. Fast, and then I'd really like to wrap it up and get back to...
Well, Madam Chair, if that is so, and we're going to be really, really strict about containing the discussions we have around this table to the specific issues mentioned in the agenda, then I'm going to make a motion that in order to have a broader discussion, that we call the minister back to committee to speak to Subs B. And that would be my motion for consideration at the next meeting of our committee.
You have every right at any time to bring forward a motion, so we will consider that at our next meeting. All right, fair enough?
That would address the problem, right?
Well, it would...
Subs B, we have a wide-ranging latitude to discuss anything we want with the minister.
Can I just make a point that I heard the point of order, and I think I was fair in how I dealt with it. The question, we tried to just focus it. It was open, very open, and it was drilling down into specifics, and we were trying to stay in the more specifics on the act, right? So
I'm not challenging you on your ruling, Madam
I
Chair.
wasn't sure if you were.
No,
okay.
no, what I'm doing is I am adapting to the ruling you've made. And
my ruling was so sorry. Just okay. So no, I don't think.
I'm not challenging it.
I think I was fair.
I made a motion.
You made a motion. You have every right to do that. We will consider that at the next meeting, and we'll go forward there. I think I was fair. I gave the time that the member had left to, and so Mark, we don't need to debate. We're not debating here. I just want to make sure that everybody around the table knows that I am mindful that we are trying to stay somewhat on the agenda. I'm very flexible. I've been very flexible for 2 years now, and I want to stay that way. I don't want the whole meeting to start to get controversial on both sides, because I think the good work that we've been doing here has been helpful because we are dealing respectfully and cordially with each other. So let's not wreck that. I tried to be reasonable, and I think everybody's had their say, including myself. So let's get back to the work of the committee today. And I want to welcome Paula Brand to the table, and Mr. Wilkinson, and Mr. Lucas is still with us. Thank you. You don't have, unless you say so, do you have a little something you want to tell us before we get questioning? Mr. Wilkinson.
So thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. This is an opportunity to ask perhaps some more specific and technical questions of officials. Paula is the person responsible for actually doing most of the work, working very actively to pull together both the strategy and the act. And of course, you've been introduced to Mr. Lucas in the past. One thing that came up earlier in the conversation that I just thought it might be useful to have Ms. Brand speak to for a couple of minutes is just the relationship between the SEAs and the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy and Act, because this is a pretty important point that's been raised, and I think that it could use a little bit more elaboration. So if with your...
Yes, I think that would be very helpful. Ms. Brand.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps just to point out and to put each of these pieces, describe each of these components, and then draw the linkage between them. We're all aware of the Cabinet Directive on environmental assessment of plans, policies, and programs, where every minister is responsible for implementing the directive. The department itself plays a particular role in establishing the environmental framework for which departments would use to assess their priorities against. So the FSDS itself, the targets that appear in that strategy, become the objectives that Department of Immigration, Department of Health will use to assess their programs, plans, and priorities against. Those assessments find their way into documents like Memorandum to Cabinet and Treasury Board submissions, where those assessments and those works are done by individual ministers and submitted through that process. The report and the Commissioner's report that we're talking about, often talking about, has chosen to take a handful of departments each cycle and assess where they are in those processes. So it's not a comprehensive view of how that cabinet directive is being affected or being implemented, but every cycle there are a few departments that are reviewed by the Commissioner of the Auditor General. PCO has a role to play in terms of the oversight that it takes when it's reviewing and providing advice on the cabinet, on Memorandum to Cabinet in general, and they have responsibilities related to that. We all, bottom line is, all departments and all ministries have a responsibility related to strategic environmental assessment. Departmental sustainable development strategies are a child of the broad federal strategy, where every department, those 26 departments, are required to put together a strategy relating how they will contribute to the contribution of the goals and targets in the strategy. The Minister of the Environment is not responsible for every goal and target in the federal sustainable development strategy. Her responsibility is to coordinate the efforts of the department, of all 26 departments, in elaborating that strategy. Environment Canada, like Environment and Climate Change Canada, like NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, or Health Canada, have specific strategies, and their ministers have responsibilities on the specific goals and targets inside those strategies. Departmental strategies can include a lot of things. They include which goals and targets departments are going to contribute to, what departmental actions departments are going to contribute to. They also include things like performance measurements and performance indicators that can be used to track whether those targets are being put into place. It includes other sustainable development contributions that department may make outside of the federal sustainable development strategy. Many of you have noted that sustainable development can be considered broader than the goals and targets, and there are some departments who have commitments outside of the federal sustainable development strategy, so their departmental strategy includes those pieces as well. And it includes the public reporting dimensions on strategic environmental assessment. So the connections, yes, are in various places, but the individual products and programs have different objectives. The strategic environmental assessment is your front-end decision-making to ministers, advice to ministers function. The federal sustainable development strategy and those departmental strategies are the plans then that come from those decisions. They include the monitoring means through indicators and performance measures in there, and then there's the public reporting side of that. So they are linked, yes, but they perform different functions inside of that. So when we talk about doing sustainable development, does not always equal doing your SEAs. There are a lot of things encompassed inside a departmental strategy that are related to sustainable development. So I thought I'd just lay those pieces out for folks to understand where they are and how they fit together.
I think that's helpful. Thank you. So, Mr. Basio.
Thank you so much for being here and for that description. And I guess I'd like to drill down a little more into that, because one of the recommendations that we had made is around this. How do we establish enforcement and accountability in this whole of government approach? And the minister had referred to the Treasury Board, and under the new provisions, the Treasury Board may establish policies and directives regarding the environmental impact of the operations of designated entities, and designated entities must take these policies and directives into account when preparing their sustainable development strategies. And so we've got strategies that are being developed, and then we've got performance measurement tools, performance indicators. How are we holding departments accountable to those measurements and indicators when they're not achieved?
Thank you for the question. So the notion of the original act is still the basis for many of the pieces you see in the bill, which is transparency. So transparency was a major portion of the first act, and it has been a major portion of our efforts to date. With respect to accountability and the enforcement types of measures, as was alluded to, we now have managed to embed throughout the act when we start at the principal level, when we start about talking about results, when we start talking about the accountabilities with respect to targets themselves must be measurable and time-bound. Departmental strategies now, under the old act, departments only had to create a plan. They never ever had to report against their plan. So that provision is new to require departments to report twice through the 3-year cycle on their what they've achieved. We, as a Sustainable Development Office inside of Environment and Climate Change Canada, work with Treasury Board Secretariat to provide guidance to departments around what should be in the nature of those plans and those reports, and so that we have some consistency for you to view those. Those reports will now be tabled in Parliament. Upon tabling, they will be immediately referred to this committee. So you will have access to all of that information. So that is a major change in the transparency. And those levers along the way afford points in time for review and assessment by yourselves, by the public, by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. We're working right now and we'll release so departments just released their plans first week of October, so all 26 departments. That was our 100% compliance. So yes, everybody did what they currently have to do under the Act. Released their plans this past October. We're currently looking at all of those and bringing them together in a electronic form, and we'll release that publicly, where we'll amalgamate those for everybody. So you will be able to see, for example, departments who have, in the strategy, there's a commitment to do resilience and adaptation planning. And that commitment in departmental plans was noted by many, many departments, and we will amalgamate those, and so you will now be able to look at individual commitments and see how many departments are doing those things and what are the program measures that they have in place. So all of that, we believe, improves transparency and accountability.
So it's the hope that through far greater levels of transparency to a number of different branches of government, via the committee, via parliamentarians, via the commissioner, that transparency in and of itself will result in higher degree of accountability and enforcement to actually fulfill the mandate of achieving the FSDS.
Transparency will play a key role, as well as the specificity that having smarter targets, and having the tools to now use to do those assessments will afford ease of that transparency.
And just one thing, Mr. Bossio, I mean, the transparency applies broadly, and certainly the committee will play an important role in that, but the transparency will apply for ministers who will need to justify to their colleagues in the governor and council as to why they are not able to meet objectives and measurable targets that they have established within their strategies.
But we've seen in the past, the commissioner will report on where people are at. I mean, we saw just in her most recent report that 5 of 19 departments had achieved their impact analysis, and I just want to ensure that through these new measures that we're actually going to have greater fulfillment of the targets, because we've seen in the past that hasn't necessarily happened. They say, yeah, we agree with the commissioner, we'll do better, and poo-poo us, and we'll move on. Do you feel that these new measures, that level of transparency is going to increase that determination to do better?
Well, part of the problem, I think, in the past has been that it was very difficult to measure whether you actually were achieving progress or not. There was no measurability in the targets. So absolutely, I think a combination of enhanced measurability with respect to targets and timelines, along with significantly enhanced transparency, actually will get us where we're all aiming to go.
Thank you.
measurement means indicators. Can one of you list very succinctly the indicators of sustainable development?
I have them in the ones that we propose to measure are in Annex, I don't know the Annex B of the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. We have a list of them. Annex 2, there's a section on performance measures, and there's a table indicating, I don't have the count right now, but we have listed the ones we're committed to reporting against.
Okay. When I look at the purpose of the Act, there is a improving the quality of life, and part of the quality of life of our citizens is the ability to have jobs and incomes is one of the indicators of sustainable development, measurements of economic growth, economic development, and job creation. Is that one of the indicators?
Not in this list right now. We have these indicators at the target level. We are undertaking work right now at the goal level of this strategy to assess what kinds of measures we will have in place for that.
Well,
yes.
Again, I find that astonishing. To me, that's strictly evasive. So quite obviously, the Sustainable Development Act is at odds with the Brundtland Commission definition of sustainable development, which is development that meets the needs of the future without compromising the needs of future generations. And Brundtland, when her and the World Commission on Environment and Development wrote Our Common Future, they were very clear that the concept of sustainable development was a development concept that actually had measurements in it for jobs and income and people. But this current act, even though you say something's being worked on in the vague future, in that list that you just showed us, there are basically no indicators of economic development and job creation.
To clarify,
okay.
Sorry, if I could clarify, there are a couple specific on clean tech sector GDP, clean tech jobs. So there are a couple of them.
Yeah, come on. There's millions of Canadians that have jobs. There are clear economic development opportunities. There's clear pockets of poverty in this country. The Maritimes, for example, just lost 15,000 jobs because the government that you're a part of put in such a process for environmental assessment that the company just threw up its hands and decided not to proceed with the project. So it's quite clear that, and again, Ms. Brand, when I listened to your opening remarks, basically you're saying we're going to have strategies for the strategies. And I had an old farmer talking to me once, one of my constituents, and I tried to explain to him some of the stuff that goes on in this place here. And he kind of looked at me puzzled, and he said, yeah, but who's out there pounding in fence posts? So again, my concern, representing a rural natural resource-based constituency, is what goes on the, on the ground. So it's quite clear that the, I want to make another quick point. How much time have I got?
You've got 2 minutes.
Sure.
Well, a little over 2 minutes.
Sure. I want to drill down specifically to something related to the minister's commitment that this act should respect the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. And I'm going to ask a very specific question here related to the environmental impacts of alternate energy development. I have a report in front of me here that talks about bird and bat mortality at wind turbines. And if we look at bats, which are an extremely critical species, many of whom are endangered, in Ontario there's some 41,000 bats killed every year by wind turbines. 3 of these bats happen to be on the endangered species list. They're SARA-listed species. The little brown myotis, the northern long-eared myotis, and the tricolored bat. I'm very curious, Mr. Lucas, why your department is letting the Ontario government and the Ontario wind industry get away with the slaughter of species that are SARA-listed in direct contravention of the Species at Risk Act.
Chair, once again, point of order. I'd like to. I don't understand the relevance to the FSDA in that question.
So
it's right here in paragraph 4 on page 4. This act is respects Canada's commitment to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. The Convention on Biological Diversity has very clear commitments to the protection of endangered species. My question is directly related, and I don't care how offended the other side might be. This is a legitimate question to ask.
I think that's fair. It's a legitimate question. It's just you got into the specifics of a particular case, so it was starting to get a little odd. But yet, no, I understand your point, and let's see what the answer is.
Without specifics, the question is meaningless.
No, okay, but you didn't. I didn't wrap round to where you were getting it from. So thank you.
So maybe I can start. I mean, the first thing I would say is if there are questions with respect to policy of the government, the orientation of the government, then I'm happy to try to answer those. Those are not appropriate questions to direct to officials. With respect to
the Act.
With respect to the issue that you raised primarily in the first instance, the focus of this Act is on improving the quality of life of Canadians. And if you go through the Act, that involves the integration of environmental, economic, and social factors. The government is committed to that very much, and that involves looking at all of those issues. With respect to your question on the Species at Risk Act, I mean, the government has been very clear that we are committed to the implementation of the Species at Risk Act in a substantive way. We are committed to biodiversity in Canada. That means that you have to actually look at a range of different issues that are going on from an economic perspective and ensure that they are compliant with the Species at Risk Act, and we intend to do that.
14 seconds.
Again, so what you're telling me, because the question I asked related to biological diversity, that the minister misled us when she said that the FSDS respects our commitments to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, which has clear statements on the protection of endangered species. So quite clearly what she said in her remarks does not apply.
I think you must be misconstruing. This government is committed to sustainable development. We are also committed to biological diversity. There's no inconsistency with those.
Thank you very much. Ms. Duncan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you for all being here still. I look forward to both the parliamentary secretary and the deputy and Ms. Brandt to clarify. I had the privilege of attending the World Economic Forum in New York. That's attended by economists, investors, banks, all of whom are clearly embracing sustainability. I'm proud to wear the button of the 17 indicators. It's my understanding we've now moved on from Brundtland, from sustainable development, to the principle of sustainability based on these 17 factors. Can you clarify if that is Canada's understanding?
I think we elaborate a definition of sustainable development in the Act that has been consistent with the previous Act, which is not perhaps verbatim with Brundtland, but consistent with Brundtland. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I think we heard the Minister and we've heard the Prime Minister talk about Canada's commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. And as the Minister said, implementation is going to be through action in how we're doing the implementing the specific pieces of them. Some of those have found their way into the current federal Sustainable Development Strategy with respect to some of the specific goals, 5 of the specific goals.
I'll just move on. I don't think that's clarifying, and I think we would do well for a government to actually clarify where we're at on these principles, because I'm not seeing them reflected in this bill that's before us. But I have specific questions for Ms. Brandt, because it's great to finally have her here to talk to. I'm wondering what role you actually play in ensuring compliance with the Act. Do you communicate with other officials at your level, or do you have access to deputy ministers, to senior officials in Treasury Board, PCO, and so forth?
Perhaps I can just say, as at the outset of that, we're engaging at all levels. So from the work Paula does with officials at her level, up to my level as deputy minister, working with my colleagues.
The statute only empowers the official appointed, so that's a little bit confusing. So you might want to revisit that, because it does leave that wide open. There have been criticisms when our committee reviewed it that was not satisfactory, that since 1990 in the Cabinet Directive, agency after department after department after agency are abjectly failing to deliver on these principles. And so there was a call, as Germany has, as Wales has, the OEC has been recommending, that this responsibility be placed at a higher level. And that's why I'm asking that specific question. Ms. Brand, as I understand, is the appointed official at a DG level. And then it raises the question of what level of authority she has to go and hold all of these other departments and agencies accountable.
Just to clarify, the Act calls for the creation of a Sustainable Development Office. I play a role in that office, but Mr. Lucas would be the official head of that office in terms
So
of
in
the
fact, the
department.
deputy minister is that official.
In terms of
I'm just asking for clarification, that's all. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's not really clear. My understanding is Ms. Brand is appointed to be that official.
I'm not appointed, no. No, I am not appointed as the official. I am the Director General of Sustainability and the Strategic Policy Branch, reporting up through the ADM through to Mr. Lucas.
Okay, I might follow up outside the committee because I have another question and time is short. When I was Public Works critic, we took on the Department of Public Works because of the absurdity of their sustainable development strategy. And it included things like increase the number of recycled pieces of paper. And so what our committee did was do a review of the tax dollars that could be saved if the government invested in energy efficiency. I know this government is beginning to move in that direction, which to me raises the question of it's fine to do a strategy, but I query the credibility of them. My question is, and it remains puzzling to me, what is the direct relationship between the cabinet directive, where every official who is submitting a plan, a policy proposal to their minister, or what is being submitted to cabinet must provide an assessment of sustainable development? And yet, the commissioner revealed to us, Treasury Board requires mandatory a written report on gender lens, no such requirement on sustainable development. So I'm really puzzled because where the rubber hits the road is when a department is proposing or an official is proposing to do a project or proposal, and that's where this should be happening, not in some vague overall policy. So how do those tie together?
30 seconds. So on this, as Paula had noted earlier, the cabinet directive applies across to all ministers and through them their officials. Privy Council Office has overall oversight for it, implementation through memorandum of the cabinet and other mechanisms. She spoke to the cross link at several stages with the federal SD strategy. In the new act, there's a specific reference to the role of Treasury Board and specifically the Secretariat in terms of the greening government operations part and their role.
And it only says environment. It's very troubling to me. It only says that they can do guidelines on environment, not sustainable development.
But to the specific point you were raising in regard to the now named Public Services and Procurement Canada, it would address those considerations in terms of their procurement and greening government of operations in the context of meeting the objectives of the environment in the Act.
Cut that off, sorry. Mr. Amos.
Thank you, Ms. Brand, for joining this conversation. It's appreciated, and I think all of us here really appreciate the hard work that has clearly been done to respond to a fairly comprehensive and dense report, and to bring and to breathe some life into it with this bill. I know that there's the whole team working with you, and we really appreciate their hard work. I'd like it if you could speak to that issue that I raised earlier around objectives for the statute. I appreciate the minister's point of view that one would not, in any particular piece of legislation, environmental, sustainable development, or otherwise, necessarily want to be so prescriptive when you're trying to achieve a broad range of outcomes. I appreciate that point. But clearly, in the past, there have been challenges associated with the implementation of this act as a direct function of the fact that there really weren't objectives. I mean, when one sees as an objective fresh water in oceans, that it's next to meaningless. So how do we get from not much of anything in the way of objectives to target where we want to go to something that isn't overly prescriptive but provides solid guidance for government's present and future?
Thank very much for the question. I do want to echo the minister's comments with respect to the principles. I think that they're an important part in giving guidance. What should a strategy consider? And so those principles are very important. In terms of mechanics, over the course of putting together the last 3 strategies, there's been an evolution of their maturity with respect to specificity. I must say that the requirement to consult has really played a big impact on what a strategy would look like in the future. So it really does take into account a wide range of comments from Canadians and from folks. We do in the background a lot of analysis on what are the current issues and the priorities to stay relevant. We do a lot of work to understand what are other countries doing to see what are the issues. We monitor what are emerging trends. We work within the interdepartmental community to understand those pieces of the work that's a priority across the government. So the strategy draws on a lot of things. The Act, as a practitioner, giving us the guidance as to where to go and what principles to make sure we're using in the development is very beneficial. And as I say, the consultation, the role the commissioner plays during the consultation, she writes, the commissioner's office has done a very detailed review, and they've been instrumental in making the evolution and the changes around progress. So as a practitioner, I think being able to have that scope and to be able to be responsive to the issues that are on the table at the time is very beneficial.
And I may add, one of the elements in the purpose is respecting Canada's domestic and international obligations. And as I noted, then that translates into the 3-year government strategy and the individual departmental ones. For example, in regard to our obligations under the Paris Agreement, as manifested in Canada through the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change, which involves over 15 different departments and agencies, and therefore an expectation to see their commitments and actions specific for that 3-year tranche of their strategies brought out and then reflected in the annual reporting.
Okay. A minute and a half. Okay, I'll be quick. Obviously, I come at this from the perspective of a past life as an environmental lawyer, and I know that many colleagues of mine in the environmental law community in Canada look to federal statutes for guidance on legal principles around environmental protection and sustainable development. The Supreme Court has over the last 30 years provided very positive guidance around legal principles that apply to across Canada. I'm not familiar with the principle of collaboration. I'm not familiar with the principle of results-oriented, I forget if it was results-oriented policy or results-oriented management. But there are a couple of principles that are proposed in this bill that I'm not familiar with. And as mentioned previously to the minister, there are several that we recommended that aren't in there. I wonder if you could comment.
1 minute. Okay. Excuse me. So as we said earlier, in terms of what is in, we looked at the range of principles that were offered through the committee's work. We looked at a number of sustainable development agreements to look at the kinds of things that are the principles that Canada has already signed on to in terms of some of those agreements. And then we also looked at codifying the kinds of things that the Act embodies. So the transparency, the working together, the being specific, using results and focusing on those. And so those were some of the ideas and the concepts used to include the principles that are proposed.
Thank you very much. Okay, we move over to Mr. Fast.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a little different direction here. Your department takes the lead in implementing the Pan-Canadian Framework on Climate Change, correct? Under that framework, NRCan apparently is proposing a suite of building code changes that will require homeowners, current homeowners, to renovate and make their houses more efficient. Are you familiar with that initiative?
The Pan-Canadian Framework, which was agreed to by First Ministers, does indeed include commitments that both the federal government, provinces, and territories agreed to in terms of work to establish a retrofit code, which is then up to each individual province and territory to implement. It then establishes a code where retrofits are done.
Apparently, they're talking about these energy efficiency improvements being required when a major quote-unquote life cycle event occurs, whether it's a major renovation of the house or the sale of the house. And the Canadian Real Estate Association has voiced very significant concerns that this could impose very significant costs on homeowners when they sell their homes, or if they're proactively required to renovate. You know, the estimates coming out of Enercan, I think, are around $35,000 on average. And I'm just wondering, can you provide us with a commitment that the government will not require provinces to implement a policy that would require homeowners to renovate up to the standards required by government when they sell their homes?
That's not my understanding of the approach. Again, the approach is to work with the National Research Council and federal, provincial, territory community and stakeholders on establishing a retrofit code that will then establish a floor for retrofits where they're done. But it's up to provinces and territories to implement. It's not tied to the sale of homes. It's on establishing a basis for improving energy efficiency through retrofit.
Who will determine what life cycle events are? Is it the federal government or the provinces?
Well, the implementation of any change in building code is up to provinces and territories. But again, the focus is on establishing a code as a floor for energy efficiency improvements. Indeed, as it's was committed to develop a new code for new buildings. For example, by 2022, to have a net zero ready code developed that provinces and territories can look at.
So it's focused on new builds rather than on...
Well, there's both a proposal in the Pan-Canadian Framework that First Ministers agreed to for a retrofit code to be developed through a consultative process involving provinces and territories and then subsequently implemented by them. There were also areas looked at, including home labeling of energy efficiency improvements, again, which would be up to provincial and territorial governments to implement. But it, to my knowledge, was not elaborated in that context any requirement on homeowners
to
retrofit
as long as
homes.
it's clear that we flagged that as an issue, very serious concern. We don't want to saddle homeowners with unexpected costs for renovations when they may not have the resources to do it. So I do have another question, and that is going back to the principles under the Act itself or the legislation, Bill C-57. Under the principles, Principle F says the principle of openness and transparency, which is the principle that the release of information should be encouraged to support accountability and public engagement. Now, that's obviously coming out of the government, coming out of the minister's office, a commitment to openness and transparency. I think you know that we've had tremendous frustration trying to get information out of your office about the economic impact assessments that have been done with respect to the national carbon tax. We received a almost fully redacted document. And what we would like to see is a full analysis of what the carbon tax will mean for the average Canadian. We now understand that Enercan has also done a similar economic impact study on the forest industry. And that also has not been released. And the mandate letter to the minister says information like this should be open by default in order to achieve that new bar that the Prime Minister was going to set for openness and transparency. can you tell this committee now that you will release to us any economic impact analyses that have been done on the carbon tax?
Mr. Fast, we've been very open and transparent with respect to carbon pricing, and as we've discussed in the past, there are facts and figures that are out there on the internet that we have posted on the website for you to go and review. So this is a conversation we've been having for several months, and it has been an open and transparent discussion.
You have not
and it will continue to be
full
so.
report. You know that. It was heavily redacted. And NRCan has said they're not going to release their report. This is important for Canadians, that they understand when the government implements a carbon tax policy, what it means for the average
So we are out of time, and we are trying to focus on FSDA. And I understand that you're talking about, you know, how we're going to be able to do accountability on these things. So I understand where the question was coming from. But anyway, we're out of time on that one, so we're going to move over to Mr. Garretson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you speak to what you see the benefits are, and I know you've already talked briefly about it, but what you see the benefits are of having each individual department create their own strategy?
I'll take that at a high level and then perhaps turn to Paula. I mean, I think it goes to the point and the questions that have been posed in regard to accountability and specificity. You know, with transparency as a key mechanism to enhance it. So from the higher level purpose and principles in the Act, they're made manifest in terms of action through the overarching 3-year strategy. But critically important are the actions that individual departments and agencies will take, now expanding to 90, to be able to implement those on a rolling 3-year cycle and be accountable ultimately to Parliament for those actions, and certainly with the additional accountability mechanism, which we think is quite powerful, of reporting year after year on that and on specific performance measures that they will bring to bear across.
So when the departments are responsible to create their own strategies, would they be in consultation with you as to how to do that? Do they reach out to you and say, can you advise us in this area or that area?
So indeed, it goes to the, Madam Chair, the question raised by Madame Duncan. Indeed, the Act does provide for the establishment of an office. It doesn't specify an individual, but rather an office, and we do play that role in helping support.
And that will be within the department?
The development of those strategies, indicators, and measures across government.
There's been some discussion about whether or not being within the department is the best place for this to happen, because there'd been a lot of discussion about if this was going to occur at the, maybe it should be within the purview of the PCO or the PMO or somewhere else. I'm curious if you, notwithstanding the fact that I'm asking you to comment on the capabilities of your own department, but would you not agree that within the department that's responsible primarily as it relates to environmental sustainability as a premier objective, that you would be more suited to help develop those strategies with the individual departments than perhaps a different organization or a different department that is more holistic? You specialize in this, do you not?
Indeed, and I think that has been why it has been established in the department, and indeed in terms of the machinery of government decision that's manifest in the Act about it being sustained there, is because of that expertise in sustainable development and certainly on environment and climate change, as we do coordinate and support other departmental efforts, for example, on clean growth and climate change. Biodiversity and these other areas of importance.
And then when it comes to the accountability, and I know that Ms. Brand, you touched on, and Mr. Lucas for that matter, touched on the accountability and the reports being tabled in Parliament, and this committee specifically having the opportunities to challenge that. Can you talk to us about the difference between what that is and what you're proposing, what currently exists and what is being proposed in the legislation?
Thank you very much for the question. And, as I mentioned, currently under the Act, departments are required to make their plans.
Yes.
Point. That's it. So what we're proposing is that departments, 1 year after making their plan, will in fact report on their plan. They'll report on their plan to Parliament, and that report, as I mentioned, will be referred directly to this committee. And so that creates a chain that did not exist.
Excuse me. So they make the plan. They report on the plan. If they can't deliver on what they came up with, would you not say that, they will be held relatively accountable to that? I mean, it's not as though the plan was imposed upon them by the PCO or the PMO or somebody else. They made the plan themselves. And then they were the ones that were reporting back on it and hence need to be accountable for it. Would you not say that puts them in an awkward position if they can't deliver on their plan?
Well, it puts them in a position of being accountable for what they've committed to. And I think that's the point of that regular reporting, of the review by the committee, ultimately of the authority of Parliament to approve plans and vote the resources to implement them, and of the reviews provided for by the Commissioner on Environment and Sustainable Development.
We have 40 seconds for our side, for the Liberal side. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we did the study for the FSDS, we heard testimony about the need to establish an advocate for Canada's future generations. Environment Climate Change has said that the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development considers the needs already of future generations. But we've also heard that the government would consider strengthening the Commissioner's mandate to better reflect some of our recommendations. But we're not seeing that in C57. I'm wondering if you've heard some of that discussion, or if it's covered by something else.
Very quick, please.
I think it's covered in the sense that sustainable development by its very nature is about future generations, so it's very much reflected in the purpose of the Act itself. It is also reflected in the fact that the Commissioner herself has a mandate that includes consideration of future generations, and so that's the position that has been taken in C57.
Okay, Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you.
We have just time for your questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for Mr. Wilkinson. Again, with reference to the Minister's speech and the bill itself, and sustainability is the topic I just wanted to speak about, and quoted the Northwest Territories Premier, a statement that he made yesterday, and I want to add a little bit more into the record. This is the Premier. For too long now, policies have been imposed on us from Ottawa and Southern Canada that, despite good intentions, sometimes in ignorance, other times, are threatening our economic potential and the decades-long work that we as a government have taken on Indigenous reconciliation, says the Premier. Whether it will be ill-conceived ways of funding social programs or new and perplexing restrictions on our economic development, our spirit and energy are being sapped. He goes on, new funding approaches that distinguish between peoples may help improve outcomes on reserve in southern Canada, but could divide northern communities. Restrictions imposed on our vital energy and resource sector, 40% of our economy and source of middle-class jobs and incomes for many of our people, are driving companies away. And with that go the jobs that sustain healthy families and community life. Staying in or trying to join the middle class will become a distant dream for many. Now, we've heard the minister talk about sustainability. We've heard a lot of talk, and there's always a lot of talk in Ottawa. But this is what policies like the ones you're proposing are affecting real people's lives in these northern communities. They affect northern Indigenous communities in my part of the province, in northern British Columbia, and really across the north, any rural part of Canada. Please explain how this is sustainable.
Well, I think, as the minister said, in the modern era, the economy and the environment need to go together. As we move forward, we believe strongly in the concept of sustainable development, which inherently is about ensuring that economic initiatives and environmental practices
So,
are
Mr.
go together. We believe very strongly in.
I've heard that said many times.
You've asked a question. Do you want an answer?
But we've heard this many times. The same, and you're reading off a page. We've heard that answer many times. The reality of it is that we're hearing from community leaders and from communities that it's not sustainable, as you're saying from your speech. And I'm just challenging you to develop a policy that actually is sustainable. When we hear from premiers that say 40% of their economy are being shut down by a policy of your government, that's a concern to me. I'll pass the rest of my time to Mr. Sopa.
That's fine.
You ask a question. Do you want an answer?
I already got it.
Okay.
Okay.
I know that the committee is going to be shocked at this, but I actually agree with Mr. Gerritsen on one point he made regarding the positioning of sustainable development in the federal government. When I ran the Sustainable Development Program under Premier Gary Filmon, I reported directly to him. Wouldn't it be better if the Federal Sustainable Development Act was managed out of quote-unquote head office in the federal government, so you wouldn't get this interministerial conflict that will probably arise because of this act?
I don't think that we've seen any kind of interdepartmental conflict. And as the deputy talked about, I mean, the relevant expertise lies in Environment Canada. It acts as a coordinating function to ensure that that departments are working on similar pathways and are compliant with what the Act requires. It's no different than how the Official Languages Act is coordinated through Heritage Canada. And to be honest, it's very consistent with how international practices are done in other jurisdictions. So.
You got 2 minutes.
Sure. Well, again, we also have the concept of ministerial responsibility. So under the Federal Sustainable Development Act, it sounds like, coordination is another word for authority. And so given that it's obvious that the Environment Minister will have some quote-unquote authority, however defined, over other departments and ministers just by virtue of being able to comment on their actions, how do we square that with the concept of ministerial responsibility? Because if a department says, well, the Environment Minister told me to do this, so I couldn't do it. And so where does a citizen go? What happens to the concept of ministerial responsibility, which is a foundation of the Westminster system?
This is completely consistent with the concept of ministerial responsibility. Departments are responsible for putting together their own plans, including their own targets, and reporting on their own progress. And each minister is accountable for the performance of their department in that regard.
Okay, I'm going to have to end.
That's
I'm
fine.
being told that it is 10:45. So thank you very much. End of session.